Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and it's Tuesday, which means we are making a tier list. We're doing something a little different this week. Instead of doing sort of a meta deck updated meta tier list where we rank the best decks in the format, what we're going to do is we're going to rank all of the best cards from Mythical Island. The meta hasn't changed too much over the last week. I think we're getting a little bit more settled down into the, this current format of Mythical Island. Maybe next week I'll do another updated meta tier list, but for this week, I just wanted to actually go back and re-rank all of the cards from Mythical Island. We did a kind of a ranking tier list sort of video when this set was released, and we were able to kind of, over the last couple of weeks, we basically have a better idea of how good these cards are. We've seen them play in a variety of different decks. We see how they all function, so we have a better understanding, I guess, or how these cards are. So it's going to be interesting to kind of compare and contrast of our previous video and now how we're kind of ranking these cards, after 3 or 4 weeks of playing with them. So that's what we're going to do today. We're not going to rank every single card, basically just all the cards that really matter. We're not going to rank like Magikarp or like Morlul, for example. So we're going to put some cards here just in like the no rank, but mostly just basic Pokemon that aren't like, there's no reason to rank them, basically, is what I'm talking about. Now, the other cool thing is once we do our tier list, this is a community tier list on Tier Maker, which means we can go after we make our tier list and we can see what the community on average ranked all these cards. So that should be really interesting to see. We'll take a look at that after, but let's get right into it. So I am going to actually rank Execute. So there is an Execute from Genetic Apex, and I actually played that one a little bit more than this version of Execute. The reason for that is that this Execute, we thought it would be really good in scenarios where you could technically play Executor in decks that don't play grass energies, right? Because this Execute for a colorless energy can accelerate a grass energy to it. It can kind of, accelerate energies to itself, therefore allowing you to play Executor in decks that you're not actually running grass energy in your energy zone, right? But that became pretty niche. Most people are playing Executor EX, which is really just, it takes one grass type energy, so there's really no reason to play this Execute over the one from Genetic Apex, which just does, I think, 20 damage for one energy. It's just overall a little bit better, especially in most scenarios. That extra tip damage we would rather have. It's not a bad card, it just isn't necessarily being used super often with Executor, so I think the old one at least is better at the moment. Now, the new Executor card, this is the third Executor that we have in Pokemon Pocket already. There were 2 from Genetic Apex, but this one from Mythical Island is actually pretty strong. Paired with the Jungle Totem, basically this Executor is able to one-shot a lot of different Pokemon in the game. It has a 4 energy attack cost, but it's actually only 2 energies if Jungle Totem is active, so it's actually its own archetype. The small Executor with Jungle Totem is its own archetype, and it is actually quite strong. It's like kind of fringe meta, to be honest with you, so I'm going to put it in the B tier. I'm going to reserve, I think, the A and the S tier for like real meta cards that are sort of meta-defining or have a really significant place in the metagame, but this Executor card is quite good. It's not as good as Executor EX, of course, which is what most people are playing, but yeah, we're gonna put it in the B tier. So next up is Celebi EX. Celebi EX is quite strong. I don't really feel like I want to put it in the S tier. I'm gonna reserve the S tier for like the truly meta defining cards. Now, Celebi EX as a deck is really strong, and it's strong mainly because it's supported by Jungle Totem, but also Executor EX, which is really an S tier card right now in the current format. But the thing with Celebi is like it is inherently really strong. It's the only grass basic EX Pokemon in the game, at least at the moment. It's got 130 HP, which is more than Pikachu, and it does have the potential to do insane amounts of damage. However, it relies on RNG, and basically it's really only guaranteed to be exceptionally strong in the late game if Jungle Totem is active, but it is still a really strong card, and as far as basic attackers go, and as far as grass type attackers go, it's really up there, and it goes really well with Executor and Jungle Totem. So I'm going to put Celebi in the A tier as just its own standalone card. Like inherently, I think Celebi is an A tier card. If it wasn't so RNG dependent, maybe we would rank it higher, but it is really strong. Potentially could go S tier, but for now I'm going to keep it in A tier. I think it's probably going to sit around the top of the A tier. Snivy and Servine, we're not going to rank those. Let's go into Jungle Totem Superior. So this is interesting. Like, Jungle Totem Superior as a card is exceptionally strong. Like, the effect is crazy if you think about it, basically doubling the grass type energies that are attached to your Pokemon. It works, of course, really well with Celebi, and it's going to exponentially increase the potential damage with Celebi. There's a lot of Pokemon that came out, grass Pokemon that came out in Mythical Island that work great with Jungle Totem, like the new Delmise, like Executor, like Celebi EX. The thing is, we don't have like a sequentially kind of guaranteed increase damaging attack Pokemon that works with Jungle Totem. For example, if there was a Pokemon that was like, for every grass type energy attached to this Pokemon, it does like 20 more damage or 30 more damage. We don't have that. It's more so like Delmise does 90 damage if it has 4 energies, or, Celebi, which you get an extra coin flip if you have another energy. So there's potential for Jungle Totem to be extremely, extremely good. The thing with Superior is that it does work with itself, which means this 4 energy attack cost for 70 damage, you can actually do for 2 energies, which is quite good if you actually think about it as a backup attacker in a lot of different decks. It's a stage 2 Pokemon, it doesn't have a ton of HP, it has a retreat cost of 2, I think it should have a retreat cost of 1. I'm going to put Jungle Totem also in the A tier. I think it's just inherently a good card, a really strong card, and it's probably going to see play. It's probably going to be pretty meta defining in all grass type decks as things go on. So we're going to put Jungle Totem in the A tier. I think it is just really good. Again, it's kind of dependent on the cards that can utilize it, but its ability is really strong. So we're just going to keep it in the A tier. This one is Chatot. Does, I think, 50 damage and then puts your opponent's Pokemon to sleep for 2 grass energies on a stage 1 Pokemon. I don't know how I feel about Chatot. It's not a bad card. Like, it could be C tier, but it's definitely not higher than that. The thing is, like, we have Wigglytuff EX, which is, yes, it's a 2 prize Pokemon. It's an EX Pokemon, but it effectively does, like, the same thing. For 3 colorless energy with a lot more HP, we do more damage, but also put our opponent's Pokemon to sleep. It's not a bad card. The thing is, like, for 2 energies, it's tough. Like, it's because it's a stage 1 Pokemon, it's not very easy to kind of throw it in decks just to have it. Like it is like sort of with the Dedenne from Mythical Island, we can kind of throw that in Pikachu decks like super easily. I just don't really love Chatot. I don't think it's a terrible card, but again, it's sort of just like there's really no reason to ever play it. Because it's an attack, like we have ways to put our opponent's Pokemon to sleep without attacking, like with Hypno. And because when you attack, you end your turn, there's no way to like really stack like paralysis or sleep with Chatot in like the same turn. I'm gonna actually put it in the D tier. It's seen like almost no play, and I really don't think it deserves to see much play. And the reason I'm gonna put it in the D tier is because Dhelmise, I'm actually gonna put in the C tier. I think that Dhelmise is actually a totally fine Pokemon. It's built in a really weird sense though, where it's not strong in the early game. It relies on either having 4 energies attached to it or Jungle Totem, and if you do have Jungle Totem in play, Dhelmise can do 90 damage for 2 energies on a basic Pokemon, on a single prize Pokemon, which is quite strong. So it's not a bad card. It's just strange because it's a basic Pokemon with a low amount of HP, relatively. 100, you're still getting KO'd by a lot of different things, but it's only useful in the late game when Jungle Totem is active, right? Like, you would think a card like this being a basic Pokemon, yes, we could hit for like 20 damage over and over again, but it's just really not that good. And if we're playing a Celebi EX or Jungle Totem, we're going to play the new Executor or the old Executor EX. That is just a better frontline Pokemon for 1 energy. It's just much better. So it's a weird card. Like, I'm not going to put it in B tier, but I'm going to put it in the C tier because it's not terrible. It still can do 90 damage for 2 energies in the mid to late game with Jungle Totem. So it's not a terrible card, but I would rank it above Chatot. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that Pokemon, but we're going to put it in the C tier for now. Okay, next up, I am actually going to rank this Ponyta. So it's basically like the small Rapidash, right? Where it does, I think, 20 damage or 10 damage, but it can do more if you flip coins. So this card is actually quite strong. I think it actually has improved Blaine decks pretty considerably. I think that it's really good on your first turn, basically being able to do pretty good chip damage for 1 energy on a basic Pokemon. Before you evolve into your Rapidash, you can attack on curve. 1 energy in the attack cost, we can then evolve it and attach an extra energy. And if you flip a couple heads in a row, you're doing a ton of damage with Rapidash. So I'm going to put Ponyta like in... It's either B or... I'm going to put it in the C tier because we're probably going to put this Rapidash card in the B tier. It's actually been pretty good in Blaine's. It's arguable whether the old Rapidash is better just because it's guaranteed damage for only 1 energy. And if you're attaching multiple energies to your Pokemon, you would probably rather attach to Ninetales. I do think that's true. But however, it gives you another option with Blaine's, and if you flip heads, you can one-hit KO a lot of different Pokemon. It's made the Blaine's decks a little bit more volatile in their damage output. They're not necessarily reliant on Ninetales to take KO, so I think that this card is actually quite good. It also has a retreat cost of 1, it has a decent amount of HP, it's a stage 1 Pokemon, and again, it kind of attacks on curve, so on your second turn, you can most definitely attack with this if you're going first, or second rather. So I do like Rapidash. I'm going to put it in the B tier. I think it with Executor fits pretty well. Now the new Magmar card, unfortunately, just isn't very good. For 2 energies, it is a basic Pokemon. The thing is, it's basically Ninetales, but worse. And basically the way that the math works out is that unless we're hitting something for weakness with Blaine's, we're just not taking the KO. 80 damage is really awkward, and it has the effect where it discards energy from itself, which means we're basically forced to either attack every single turn with Magmar, or we're not able to attack and we're choosing to set up our benched Pokemon. So it's basically Ninetales, but it doesn't have nearly enough upside. Has a retreat cost of 2, has a low HP count as well. Very low HP because it's a basic single prize Pokemon. So I'm going to put Magmar, I think, in the C tier. I don't think it's terrible again, but I think there's just better options in Blaine's decks. It does work with Blaines, which is why it's not in D tier, I guess. But overall, I don't know how I feel about Magmar. It's tough. Like I thought Magmar would be quite good. I thought originally it would be a good inclusion to the the Blaines decks, but it just turns out to not really be the case. We prefer to play the old Ninetales or the old Rapidash or the new Rapidash. Magmar just doesn't really have necessarily a great place in those decks. So we're going to keep it in the C tier. We're not going to rank Larvesta, but Volcarona. So Volcarona is also kind of interesting. I don't know. It's either B or C tier for me. I think, again, there's so many other better Fire-type decks. I think the attack is still quite strong. 80 damage to any one of your Pokemon is good. We can kind of set this thing up with Moltres. It can take KOs, so it's interesting. The thing is, it's a stage 1 Pokemon, so it's taking up quite a bit of room in a deck that already is running a lot of different Pokemon. You're running Moltres, you're probably running either Arcanine or Charizard, so there's just not a lot of room for Volcarona in those decks, unfortunately. And the other downside with Volcarona is that it's just not something you can kind of focus the deck around. Yes, you could run Moltres with Arcanine and Volcarona. It could be quite good. It could be pretty decent, but 3 energies is a little bit steep, especially since, again, our things like Arcanine take 3 energies and Charizard takes 4 plus because you're discarding. And all these Fire-type cards discard energies, so they're really kind of one-hit wonders after they use their attack. It's unlikely that they're going to be able to attack again, but 80 damage is considerable to a bench Pokemon, and it certainly can be good. We're going to put it in the C tier. I'm trying to think of sort of tournament meta results of Volcarona. I don't think it's really even in the meta at all. Is probably why I want to keep it in the C tier. I would put it B tier, but it just hasn't, like, it's not even in like any fringe decks, I don't think. I think people are just choosing not to play Volcarona really for any scenario. Maybe it's B tier though. Let's put it in the B tier for now. We might move it out. We'll see exactly how that goes. But okay, so next up is going to actually be the new Salandit card. Whoops, my bad. I didn't mean to do that. We're gonna rank the new Salandit card because this is actually a good card in its own right. It does 10 damage, but does 40 more if the opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned. It's really weird. Like this Salazzle card is the second form of Salandit, but the Salazzle is the one that poisons. So it's a really weird conjunction here between these two cards. Basically, like, the Salandit does boosted damage if the opponent is poisoned, but its evolution is the one that poisons your opposing Pokemon. So it's really quite weird. But this Salandit card can be quite good as sort of a Pokemon to do 50 damage to a poisoned opponent. As a basic Pokemon for only 1 energy, so it's not that bad. I'm actually going to put it in the C tier. It's not B tier. I don't think it's like, it has squeezed its way into some Weezing decks. I know some people like to run it, and I don't think it's bad. I think it's honestly a pretty good option in those Weezing decks, but I don't think Poison or Weezing is good enough for me to put it in the B tier. I just don't know if it's necessarily like fringe meta yet. I don't know. It's a weird card. I don't think it's bad actually, and I think it's actually better than Salazzle, which I'm going to put in the D tier. Which doesn't have a lot of HP. Yes, it has a 1 energy attack cost, but it only does, I think, 30 or 40 damage, and then it poisons. So it's really weird. Like, we would rather play Weezing in every different scenario, basically. And it's it has less HP than Weezing. It has a return cost of 1, I guess, but I don't know. I just don't think there's really any reason to run Salazzle. I actually think there was a Blaine's deck playing Salazzle that did pretty decent, so maybe it does actually just belong in the C tier. Maybe Salandit goes B tier. I don't know. We'll keep them both in the C tier for now, but I really don't like Salazzle. I'm sure there's probably worse cards, so I guess we'll keep it in the C tier for now. This new Magikarp card, I'm not going to rank it, although it is the preferred way to play Magikarp because you are able to get out of the active spot by attacking, which is good. So maybe we put it in the C tier, but I don't know. I'm not even going to rank Magikarp. It's got 30 HP, so it's really the other side of the coin that is the S tier card of Gyarados, which we're going to put, of course, in the S tier. It's the strongest Pokemon in Pokemon Pocket right now. 180 HP for a Stage 1 Pokemon that does 140 damage. Yes, the attack cost is 4 energies. Yes, you have the opportunity, or I guess the chance, to discard an energy from yourself. However, Misty exists, so the ability to get this thing set up is really easy, or easier than it should be. 180 HP is crazy, so it's not even getting KO'd by a lot of different things. It can KO most things in the format. Gyarados is inherently the strongest deck in the game right now. The only downside, again, is this Magikarp card. I'm going to put Magikarp in the C tier. Actually, I'm going to put it in the D tier. We're going to put it in the D tier with Magikarp, kind of as a meme, but also because it's the main reason. It's like the only downside to Gyarados is the fact that Magikarp only has 30 HP. It's how they balanced the archetype. And there's a lot of Pokemon that do benched sniping damage, doing 30 damage just to KO these Magikarps, things like Substrike and Hitmonlee. So we're going to put Magikarp in the D tier because it is really the only downside to playing Gyarados, and it's inherently a very terrible card. But, I mean, I don't know. I could probably just put it in the not ranked, but we'll put it in the D tier for the memes. Okay, so next up is going to be Vaporeon. Vaporeon is interesting. Like, I could put it in the B tier because I do think it's fringe meta. I think there are decks that can utilize Vaporeon. However, I think that most Misty decks right now focus around being fast-paced, being really aggressive, and having fast tempo. Vaporeon is really only useful in the mid to late game. It's a stage 1 Pokemon. It doesn't necessarily have a strong attack. The effect of its ability, rather, is really, really strong in certain scenarios. It's just, the thing is, most of the time, if we're playing Gyarados, we're playing Druddigon and Greninja. If we're playing Articuno, we're probably playing Greninja or even Druddigon as well, maybe even with Starmie. So, like, there are archetypes where Vaporeon is good. I think you could play it with Lumineon and Starmie. You could play it in really any other water deck, but I think there's just other better ways to play water decks most of the time. However, I think this card could be really strong. We got to look at this ability like in a vacuum. And I think in a vacuum, this ability is quite strong, even though Pokemon Pocket games are quite short. I think there probably is going to be scenarios where this card enables really strong strategies, and inherently the ability is good. I don't think it's as good as Jungle Totem. At least we haven't seen it be, but I'm going to put it in the B tier for now. I think it's a good card. It just hasn't necessarily, found a great place in this particular metagame. So we're going to put it in the B tier. Next up is Lumineon, which I'm also going to put in the B tier. We've seen Hooglin, Jeff Hooglin, and as well as a lot of players actually doing pretty well with Lumineon and Starmie. I think it's a very consistent deck. I think Free Retreat is always really good. It's going to make cards just exponentially that much better. It's a stage 1 Pokemon, so technically we can attack on curve with Finneon, and then into Lumineon. But bench damage is bench damage, and it's just inherently a strong card, able to finish KOs, gives decks pretty much a lot of flexibility. It makes Starmie and Lumineon a pretty good tempo deck in this format. You pair it with Misties, it's honestly an underrated deck right now, but water type decks are always, at least in the format at the moment, are going to be dominated by Gyarados, so not a lot of room, at least for a lot of people playing Starmie and Lumineon, but I do think Lumineon is actually quite a strong card. It's going to go in the B tier with Vaporeon. I think they go really well together. Choodle is going in the not ranked. I don't know. There's nothing to say about it. In fact, it's terrible because we can't even attack on our first turn with it. But Dreadnought. Okay, so what does Dreadnought do? I need to pull up Dreadnought because I literally don't know what Dreadnought does. Let me go back and give me 1 sec while I pull up Dreadnought because I've never actually even looked at this card first. Okay, so 130 HP on a stage 1 Pokemon is pretty decent for sure. Retreat cost of 3, which is quite bad. Does crunch 70 damage, flip a coin if heads, discard a random energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. So not a terrible card, but again, why are we playing Dreadnought? Why? Actually though, right? You got to think there's so many other water type cards. There's Starmie, there's Lumineon, there's Gyarados, there's Articuno. There's literally no reason to play Dreadnought. In a vacuum, this card isn't terrible. 70 damage for 3 energies isn't great, but we do have Misties. It can go a little bit quicker. I'm just gonna put it in the D tier. I don't think it's ever seen any play, and I don't think it's worthwhile. I don't know. I guess it's probably C tier, but I don't know. I'm gonna put it in the D tier. I don't like Dreadnought as a card really at all. Okay, so anyway, next up through Cramorant. So Cramorant's interesting as well. It was a card that stood out to me early on. I thought that it could be funny in some decks. Basically, you do a small chip amount of damage here. Is it 40 or no, it's 60 damage, which actually is pretty considerable for a basic Pokemon. Only 80 HP, attack cost of 3. Flip a coin, and if heads, then you're basically immune to damage and effects of your opponent's attacks next turn. So it's interesting. It's not immune to Sabrina, basically. You could easily get Sabrina with Cramorant. It's kind of like Dugtrio from Genetic Apex. However, it takes 3 energies to attack instead of just 1. It's a basic Pokemon. Yes, we could pop off with Misties and start attacking from turn 1. So it could be pretty decent. I think if this attack cost was 2 energies, it would be exponentially better. But in overall, I'm going to put it Cramorant also in the D tier. I just don't think there's really ever a reason to play it. Cards that have just underwhelming attacks and then additional effects that are coin flip based are just inherently not good. That's why in the D tier we have Chatot, Dreadnought, and Cramorant. These are cards that are inconsistent but also just inherently not that strong. So I just don't really feel like there's ever a reason to play it. I mean, Dreadnought and Cramorant, it's weird because when you think about it, you're oh, you could play this card. It could do well. You could just win with it, right? Because they're Misty, they're water cards. So you can play Misty, and these things could get up and running really early. But overall, I think they're just terrible. I don't think there's really ever a reason to be playing those cards. If you like Cramorant and you like Dreadnought, I apologize, but they've just done nothing in the format, and they probably won't in the future as well. They're kind of just flavor cards thrown in. Next up is the Circle Circuit Pikachu. Now, this one is interesting. Technically, you can do more damage with this Pikachu than the other Pikachu. For 1 energy, you can do 30 damage instead of 20. It's reliant on having benched Pokemon. I don't think this Pikachu really, did much in the metagame because really the extra damage didn't necessarily matter to most degree. We're hitting for weakness on a Magikarp, so it really doesn't matter. I think the older Pikachu just doing 20 damage no matter what is probably better. It's just more consistent. However, in the future, there might be scenarios where, doing 30 damage with 1 energy on your first turn really could be the difference. But I don't think the new Raichu card ended up being very good either way, and people aren't really playing Raichu as much as Zebstrika with Pikachu, so I don't really think this Pikachu has been very like meta-defining. I don't think it's been considerably strong in any particular matchup for any reason. So we're gonna just put it in like the C tier. I don't think it's terrible. In fact, I might even, yeah, let's just put it in the C tier. It's not like a terrible D tier card, but again, it's not really impactful. It hasn't changed much. Next up is the new Raichu card, which I thought was interesting. I thought we could get some spread decks. There is certain decks, like this card does go with the new Electabuzz card, which also does bench damage. This Raichu does 60 damage, but it, does 20 damage to all your opponent's bench Pokemon. So it's like, I don't know. We would always, I think, rather play the Genetic Apex Raichu, which does 140 to the active. It's just considerably stronger, and it can one-hit KO Pokemon. So I'm going to put Raichu in the C tier. I thought it was probably going to end up maybe in the B tier in some specific niche spread decks, but it really isn't that good. There's really no reason to play this Raichu. So I'm going to put it in the C tier. I don't think it's terrible. I'm not going to put it in the D tier. I'm not that disrespectful, but yeah, I don't think it's that good. Okay, so next up is Electabuzz, which is actually interesting. So we're ranking Electabuzz as how strong of a card it is. It works with Lieutenant Surge. We can do 40 damage to a bench Pokemon. It is a basic single price Pokemon, so it's interesting. Like, I'm actually going to put it in the B tier because it's actually won and placed exceptionally high in a variety of recent online tournaments, being a card that you kind of throw into Pikachu EX as a sort of a backup attacking option. It can be useful in some scenarios. You can KO a Magikarp. I think it's decent because it works with Surge. Even if you're not running Surge in your deck, it's still rather consistent. 40 damage is 40 damage to a bench Pokemon, and for 2 energies, we could potentially win the game by attacking a benched Pokemon as well. So I think it's a really good fill-in card to Pikachu. I don't think it's like defining to any degree, but I'm going to put it in the B tier. I think it's pretty strong. I think it's pretty decent. It is what it is. I think it's better than a lot of the cards, at least in C tier, in my opinion. So we're going to put it in the B tier. Joltik, we're not going to rank. It's just, it is what it is. Now we have Galvantula. Now the new Galvantula card is interesting. A lot of people were trying to play Pikachu with Galvantula. They were trying to make this card work, but it just isn't that strong for just a variety of reasons. Only 80 HP on a stage 1 Pokemon is not a lot. It has a retreat cost of 1, so it doesn't even have free retreat, but we do 70 damage, and yes, we can make it so our opponent can't retreat next turn. This can be good in some scenarios, in certain decks that, start with a Pokemon that they don't want to start with. 2 energy, 70 damage isn't actually that bad. It kind of replaces like Electrode, I think, from Genetic Apex in those Pikachu decks, but again, in the format right now, we're not going to be building a deck around Galvantula, and if we're going to be playing Pokemon with Pikachu EX in those Pikachu EX decks, I just don't think Galvantula really fits the bill. I think we would rather play Zebstrika or even the new Raichu. So I'm gonna put Galvantula again in the the C tier. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's defining or even fringe meta to that degree. It's just a card that's not terrible, so it's not gonna go in the D tier, but it's gonna go into the C tier. Now next up is Dedenne. I have strong opinions on Dedenne personally because I think this card is absolutely really, really good. I almost want to put it in the A tier, but I'm not going to. I'm going to put it alongside Electabuzz in the B tier. It's a great card. You're going to see it in Pikachu decks all the time, and people a lot of times don't necessarily know like why they would play Dedenne. And if you don't know why you should be using Dedenne in Pikachu, like you just don't know necessarily, like you haven't thought of like the scenarios at least that Pikachu, or Dedenne rather, can help you in those Pikachu decks. The reason basically is that for 1 energy, we can not only stall for a turn and do chip damage, but we can hit Gyarados for 30 damage with weakness and potentially stall for a turn. This can basically fix the math a lot of times in those matchups. Not even Gyarados, but there are games where basically we have our backs up against the wall, and the only option is to go into Dedenne, hit for a couple times, and maybe we flip heads 2 or 3 times in a row, and that can literally be the difference between you losing and winning a game. So being able to paralyze your opponent for only 1 energy and do some good chip damage in the process. We can also start with it in the active spot, attack for 1 energy and KO a Magikarp in the active spot with hitting for weakness again. So Dedenne is exceptionally good in Pikachu. It's just overall a really, really, really good card because it's a basic Pokemon, because it has a 1 energy attack cost and we can paralyze our opponent. The damage doesn't even matter, and I think that's why it has only 10 damage in its attack cost, because it doesn't even need damage for it to be an effective attack in a valuable card in that deck. So because it slots really good in all Pikachu decks, we're going to put Dedenne in the B tier. Mew, this is the same thing as like the immersive Mew from Genetic Apex. I'm not even going to rank it just because it's not a new card, but also like it's never going to see play. So I'm not even going to rank it, but if we would, it would be like D or C tier, but we're not going to rank it. Okay. Sorry, next up is going to be Mew EX, which is going in the S tier. Mew EX is, I think, one of the cards that is going to have the best staying power in Pokemon Pocket. This is a card that's going to scale infinitely as, you know, new cards come out, new expansions come out. Mew EX will always be relevant. It will always be strong. It is just an inherently really strong Pokemon. It can just KO a lot of different things in the game for 3 energies, colorless energies, and its attack cost. You can slot it in so many different decks, and it makes Mewtwo EX that much better as well. It's a really good counter meta card. It's just great. We're going to put it in the S tier for just a variety of different reasons, but very meta defining in this current format. Sigilyph. So Sigilyph seemed good on paper, but I think people realized that these cards, similar to Meowth, that you lead in the active spot, maybe you draw some cards, but it's not worth, you know, you're basically giving your opponent a free prize card on their second or third turn. It just isn't worth that trade value. Basically, with Mewtwo in all Psychic type decks, you would rather sort of not let your opponent take a KO before you go into your two prize EX Pokemon. That way they have to KO 2 Pokemon and not just, you know, Sigilyph and then, you know, your Gengar or your Mewtwo or your Mew. So Sigilyph, I thought it would be decent, but it's not really. I'm going to put it in the C tier. It's not a terrible card, but in general, I think that there's much better lead-off options. You would rather just lead off with like a Mewtwo EX, not do any damage, not draw cards, but not give your opponent a point. So for that reason, we're going to put it in the C tier. Not going to rank Elgium or Elysium or however you pronounce that, but Beheeyem is actually quite a good card. I'm going to put Beheeyem in the B tier. There's quite a few decks that actually run Beheeyem, and I think that it's honestly a good card. It's kind of the only like fast-paced, sort of aggressive Psychic type card that we have in the game right now. It fits into Pidgeot, it fits into Gengar, and it's in a variety of different cards. It's fringe meta. It's not like meta defining. It hasn't found its way into really any top tier Psychic type deck. Similar to the Fighting Primate card, but it just doesn't have the support around it. So I'm going to put Beheeyem in the B tier. I think that it's kind of fringe meta. I think that it could be really relevant. Basically, it does tier damage. It can potentially pop off for only 1 energy, which is good as well. But it's a good leadoff option. It's aggressive. It's good in the mid to late game as well. It's just a consistent attacker. It doesn't have a place in Mewtwo at the moment, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good card. So I'm going to put it in the B tier for sure. I'm liking our B tier. I think that it's a really good spot. We're not going to rank Flabebe or Floette, but Florges. So Florges is another really interesting one. How do I feel about Florges? I'm probably going to put it in the C tier, however, maybe B tier. The reason for this is because, again, Psychic type decks are really just dominated by Mewtwo EX. There's not a lot of room to play Florges in your deck. It's a stage 2 Pokemon, which makes it that much more awkward. If it was a stage 1 Pokemon, which I know it's not, but if it was, just like, let's just say, then this card would be quite good, basically. The attack is cool, it can heal, it does consistent damage. It doesn't have that much HP, rather, for a stage 2 Pokemon. And basically, if you're going to be playing a stage 2 Pokemon in your deck, it's got to have either an exceptionally strong attack or an exceptionally strong ability. Florges is kind of middling, so we're going to put it, I think, in the B tier is fine. Again, kind of fringe meta. We have seen some Florges decks do decent, do okay, so I think it deserves to be outside of the C tier. The C tier is more so like not terrible, somewhat useful cards that aren't necessarily, you know, fringe or meta defining. B tier is sort of those fringe meta cards. So we're going to put Florges in the B tier alongside Beheeyem. Next up, okay, so we've got Swirlix, we're not going to rank. And what is this, Slurpuff? Is that what this Pokemon is called? I honestly don't know what this card does. Let me pull this up so I can see. Stage 1 Pokemon, 100 HP, Psychic and a colorless, 60 damage, magical shot. Yeah, we're going to go in the D tier here. Again, not terrible, but like, why, right? Like, literally, though, there's just nothing this card does that is like, there's no reason to play Slurpuff unless Slurpuff is literally the only Pokemon that you have to play. You know what I mean? Like, there's other better options. There's just other things out there. We're going to put it in the D tier. These, again, are just sort of flavor cards. These are cards that are like, yeah, they're in the set, but like, why are we playing them? Okay, so going in the D tier. Sorry, Slurpuff. I do apologize for that. Next up is going to be the new Mankey card, which does 50 damage if you flip heads. Does 0 damage if you flip tails. So I think a lot of people, or at least a lot of fighting type decks, were playing split between the old Mankey and the new Mankey. This new one can pop off, do 50 damage, which is kind of crazy if you think about it as a basic Pokemon. But again, it can also do no damage. I think the old Mankey just did 20 or 30 damage no matter what, but it did energy or damage to itself. There's actually 3 Mankeys now that I think about it. And as far as Mankeys go, I don't think that this one is very good. So I'm just going to put it in the D tier. The reason I am going to rank it is because maybe it's C tier. I guess it's C tier, just because we could possibly do 50 damage, which would be really strong. Yeah, we'll put it in the C tier. But yeah, I think most people are probably electing to play the other Mankeys. But I'm going to rank it because this isn't the only Mankey, right? So it's compare and contrast against sort of the other versions of Mankey. We're going to put it in the C tier. I think it kind of goes in the same vein as Ponyta, and as sort of a flavor inclusion in the decks that, you know, run their evolutions. Okay, so next up is going to be Primeape, and Primeape is quite interesting. I'm going to put it in the A tier, which is funny because Primeape isn't inherently that strong of a card. It's got 80 HP, it's a stage 1 Pokemon, but does 50 damage for 1 fighting type energy. You might be looking at this like, why would we put Primeape in the A tier? The reason you're putting Primeape in the A tier is because it's consistent. It's consistent and it's decent quality. It's one of the best cards going first. On your second turn going first, we can just start attacking for 50 damage for only 1 energy. It's really good. It's a really strong lead off card in a lot of different fighting type decks. Yes, it has good partners right now with Marshadow. Yes, it has good partners with Aerodactyl. Okay, you know what? Actually, I'm convincing myself that Primeape maybe isn't an A tier card. I don't think it's like inherently meta. But right now it is meta because of the Pokemon that you know, you run with it in the deck. So it fits really well in those fighting type decks and their strategies. I'm going to put it in the B tier. These aren't in any order, but I'm going to put this Primeape card in the B tier. I think it is good. I think that it's sort of elevated in play mainly because it has really good cards to play around it. The fact that you can kind of, you know, revenge and take a KO with Marshadow makes this card that much better. The fact that you can pair it with Aerodactyl also makes this card that much better. So for that reason, we're gonna put, you know, Primeape in the B tier. But in terms of its like meta placement, like the decks in which you play Primeape would go in the A tier. But I think Primeape in a vacuum is probably a B tier card. I think it's really good, but you know, not anything that crazy. So we do have Geodude. We do have Graveler. I'm not going to rank these just because we have other versions as well, and I don't think there's really any reason to play this Geodude. Maybe you play this Graveler because it's got 2 energies and its attack cost, but overall, yeah, I don't know. Maybe, okay, we'll put Graveler in the C tier because I think it is better than the old Graveler, which has 3 energies and its attack cost. So this allows us to attack on curve at least with Graveler. So next up though, let's rank Golem. So Golem is interesting. I kind of wanted to put it in A tier, but as we've seen, Golem really isn't a strong card. It's not a terrible card, but it just doesn't, it doesn't do necessarily like enough. Like 160 HP is a lot. After we attack, we do reduced damage. The problem is that it doesn't necessarily matter because we're not one-hit KOing a lot of different things. Yes, we're one-hit KOing something like a Pikachu, but we would be one-hit KOing it anyway because we're hitting for weakness on it. So Golem isn't a terrible card. That's why I'm going to put it in B tier. I think very similarly to Primeape. I just think that we would rather play fighting type decks a different way, more fast-paced, more aggressive. But Golem inherently is a good card, and it does work with Brock, so you got to keep that in mind. I think Golem safely in the B tier. I think that it's a good card, but I don't think that it's necessarily anything super crazy. So next up is Aerodactyl. Now, people really kind of were, you know, they didn't understand what Aerodactyl was all about. And I didn't either. I thought Aerodactyl would be a strong card, but for kind of a different reason than it ended up being. I think the effect is sort of just a secondary thing. It's just sort of like, hey, like, listen, like, this is something that might come into play during your matches. It could be good for you. It could disrupt your opponent, and it could make things easier for you in your match. But overall, we're playing Aerodactyl kind of as that last line of defense in the deck. 140 HP stage, 1 Pokemon doing 80 damage for 2 energy. So it's basically in a lot of fighting type decks, we play off with, you know, Primeape or Farfetch'd or Hitmonlee in the active to start the games. Then we go into Marshadow. Maybe we take a Revenge KO. That's sort of the middle Pokemon in our lineup. And then at the end of the game, we go into Aerodactyl. So it really is sort of that, you know, that backup option. It provides value while it's sitting on the bench throughout the game. And then at the end of the game, you can do some consistent damage and 2-hit KO most Pokemon in the game. So I do like Aerodactyl. I think the effect isn't terrible either. It does come into play, especially if you get an Aerodactyl early. It forces your opponent to have to either, you know, move around their Pokemon a certain degree, which can be pretty punishing. And there could be like a fighting type card in the future that sticks Pokemon in the active spot when it attacks, similar to something like an Arbok. And if we see something like that, I think Aerodactyl could be pretty relevant. I really, really do. I don't think Aerodactyl is like super meta-defining in its own right, but I think it is a really, really good card. And I think at least in the format right now, there is a lot of reasons to play Aerodactyl other than, you know, just sort of, you know, rather than playing something like a Marowak, for example. I think Aerodactyl is a little bit better. It's more consistent, and its effect is pretty good. We're going to put it in the A tier for sure. Marshadow, though, I kind of want to put Marshadow in the S tier. However, I don't know. I don't think it's like that meta defining. It could be, actually. It's so good against Pikachu. It's the main reason why fighting type decks right now are viable to any degree. The combination of a Primeape 50 damage and then the 90 damage or 100 damage from Marshadow really does kind of make a difference in a lot of different matchups. It allows you to finish KOs for a total of really low energy attack costs. It's only 2 energies, 1 colorless, 1 fighting, for 100 damage on a basic Pokemon is inherently really strong. I might actually put it in the S tier. I think it's going to be a staple in really any fighting type decks moving forward. So I actually really like Marshadow. Is it better than Aerodactyl is the question. I don't know. I don't think it's like S tier. Like, I don't think we want to put it in the S tier. I think we want to be a little bit more reserved as to, you know, what cards we put into the S tier. So I'm going to put it in the A tier, but I think it's up there with Aerodactyl. It's an extremely good card. It makes fighting type decks that much better. Okay, next up we have Stonejourner. 120 HP on a basic is a lot. Retreat cost of 3, which is also a lot, not great. And yes, we do 90 damage for 3 energies. So we're going to put it in the D tier. Again, there's no real place for Stonejourner. There's no way to accelerate fighting energies other than Brock, which only works for Onyx and Golem. So Stonejourner should never see play. It doesn't do anything that we can't do better in other different scenarios. There's just no reason to play Stonejourner. We're not going to commit 3 energies to it to do 90 damage. Now, 120 HP is a decent amount. It's quite a bit, actually, which is pretty funny. But there's still a lot of Pokemon that one-shot you. We're going to put in the D tier. Probably not going to play Stonejourner for any degree. Okay, so the new coughing. Now, Wheezing hasn't been really meta. It hasn't been like a meta card. It hasn't been like a meta strategy, at least in the format. But maybe next format when we get new, next expansion, when we get new Dark type cards, Wheezing could be really relevant. But this coughing card is actually quite good. It doesn't do any damage, but it allows you to thin your deck and put an additional coughing on your bench. So strategies and decks that rely on those Wheezings, wanting to get multiple Wheezings out so you can kind of bounce between them with Koga. This allows you to thin your deck basically and just consistently drawn to another basic Pokemon. The only downside with this coughing is that, like, let's say we start with coughing, but we also start with a Pokeball in our deck. You might just draw the other coughing off the Pokeball, which means this attack isn't doing anything for you. So I think a lot of decks would probably rather want maybe one copy of this coughing and then one copy of the other coughing. But at the same time, like, we might just want to do additional damage. So I think there's a use for this coughing. I think it can be good. I think thinning your deck is always good. So we're going to put it in the C tier. I think that it has a purpose, and I think that it is in some ways an upgrade to the old coughing. So in the C tier it goes, along with things like Execute, Salandit, Pikachu. This is sort of that tier. This is that kind of tier. All of these Pokemon are fitting into here. Now, this new Wheezing card hasn't seen any play particularly. This Wheezing is interesting. It does 50 damage for 2 Dark-type energies. And then during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon tries to attack your opponent. You flip a coin, and if it's tails, it does nothing. So this basically, I think, works. It's Sabrina proof. So, like, you can't Sabrina. This effect will basically applies to your opponent's active Pokemon and not any of your Pokemon. So Sabrina doesn't beat this Wheezing. 50 damage for 2 energies and potentially late shutting off your opponent's Pokemon. It's not terrible. It's not great. If this card also could poison maybe, then it would be okay. But I don't think there's a reason to play this. Again, dark type cards in general aren't very good, but I don't think that this is like a super terrible card, but I don't think it's necessarily really strong. It hasn't really seen any fringe play either. So we're just going to put it in the C tier. I think it has purpose. It does have the potential to do something at least. But for overall, we would rather play the other Wheezing. So we're going to put this in the C tier. I think it has some sort of a reason. Let's not rank Purloin, but Liepard. So Liepard is quite interesting. So it's very similar to the Primeape. However, 40 damage as opposed to 50 is a big difference. There's a lot of Pokemon that we miss KOs on. Dark type also really is only strong against Psychic type Pokemon, and yes, we're hitting Mewtwo's for 60 damage, but we're still 3 at KOing a Mewtwo. So I think because Dark type cards in general aren't really relevant, even though this card isn't terrible because it's very similar to Primeape, I just don't think that it kind of fits at all into Dark type decks. I don't think Dark type aggro decks are really a thing, and they probably really won't be a thing, so I don't think Liepard really has any purpose. It's not a bad leadoff. In fact, you could put it in the C tier, I guess, but I'm just going to put it in the D tier because I don't really think that we're ever going to play Liepard for any scenario. So next up, we have Venipede and Whirlipede and Scolipede. So I'm actually going to put Whirlipede in the C tier because this is a stage 1 Pokemon within a 1 energy attack cost that can poison your opponent's Pokemon. So it's good on curve, basically. We can attack on curve and then poison and then go into Scolipede and do really significant damage for 2 energies. So I am gonna rank Whirlipede. I'm gonna put it in the C tier, but I don't think it's like necessarily great. I don't think it's like a key Pokemon for any reason, but the Venipede I'm not gonna rank, but the Whirlipede I will rank. The Scolipede I am going to put in B tier. This is fringe meta. I really would have liked to put Scolipede in the A tier, but I think that it relies on things like Wheezing, and inherently it's not that crazy of a card. Yes, you can do 120, plus the poison is 130 for only 2 energies on a stage 2 Pokemon. It's got a decent amount of HP, I think, with 140, so it's not a bad card. So it definitely, I think, belongs in the B tier, but I'm not going to put it in the A tier amongst these other cards. I don't think it's as good. I think that it's enabled by Wheezing, but I don't think that it's inherently itself that strong of a card. Again, seen some kind of fringe play. Scolipede is not a bad deck, but I think the main reason why that deck is good is because of things like Wheezing and Koga. Scolipede really just sort of benefits off of that. Now, if Poison becomes a really important archetype and Dark-type Poison decks become really strong in the next metagame after the expansion, this card could be possibly higher up, but for now, I think that's why we're going to put it in the B tier, not A or C tier. Okay, next up we have Druddigon. Druddigon, man. So right now, this is an S tier card. And the reason I'm going to put Druddigon in the S tier is because it works massively well in the Pokemon TCG Pocket playstyle. Basically, the way that the game works is fast-paced. A lot of times, decks are forced to put Pokemon in the active spot that aren't providing a lot of value early in the game. The thing with Druddigon is it provides value, it does damage, it has a lot of HP, and it's only worth 1 prize, and you don't have to attach any energies to it. Decks like Gyarados, decks like Greninja, there's so many different decks that utilize Druddigon as literally just something to keep in the active spot and force your opponent to either attack it or not attack it, which either way is good for you because it's doing additional damage. And chip damage for no energy is always going to be good. It fixes the math in a lot of different scenarios, and it's kind of enabled a lot of different setup decks like Gyarados and Greninja. Even like, what other decks are running Druddigon right now? I guess there's some Articuno decks are, but Blastoise was also running Druddigon. So there's a lot of different ways to play Druddigon. I do think it's an S tier card. I think it's very meta defining right now. Partly because it fits so well with Gyarados, but I think it's actually going to be pretty relevant as time goes on, even into next format when the new expansion comes out, unless there's just like a new card that's better than Druddigon. I think Druddigon will have a really important place, and I think it's going to be pretty significant in the metagame for quite a long time. So we're going to put it in the S tier. I think it's very meta defining, at least right now. And we're not going to rank Pidgey or Pidgeotto. In fact, like Pidgeotto is bad because you can't attack on curve with it, so we would never play it. Pidgeot EX. So here's the funny thing. Again, I think we have to put it in the B tier because it's a fringe meta card. It's not a bad card. I understand where they were going with it. It's a colorless energy, which means like colorless Pokemon need to be balanced in the sense that like because you can play them in any deck, they can't be like the strongest card because then like every deck would just run Pidgeot, right? There's no limitation into what deck you could play Pidgeot in. So it has to be inherently a little bit less strong than the other, cards that have energy, like Gyarados, for example. So there's Pokemon that do Pidgeot things better than what Pidgeot does. It doesn't have guaranteed damage, it's variable damage. Yes, it works with Pokeflute or Pokemon Flute, but again, it's just not that great. It has less HP than Gyarados for a stage 2 Pokemon. It does less damage. Yes, we have a retreat cost of 1. Yes, we're colorless. I think that Pidgeot is a fringe meta card. I think that it could see play. Again, it's kind of taking the place over of Wigglytuff in last format, where it's sort of that fringe colorless EX Pokemon that can do good. It can, of course, beat your opponent in a variety of different decks and in different matchups, but overall, we're just going to choose to not play Pidgeot above the other sort of meta decks or top decks in the format. So Pidgeot, it's going to go in the B tier. I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's necessarily super, super good. Next up is Tauros. So I was really high on Tauros because I thought that the meta was going to develop in a particular way. I thought that the meta was still going to be heavy Pikachu. I thought that it was going to be heavy Celebi and heavy Mew EX. And these are cards that Tauros does really good against. For 3 colorless energies, similar to Pidgeot EX, we can do significant damage and we can KO. It's colorless, so we can fit it into a lot of decks. It works good with Weezing. It works good in a variety of different archetypes. It's a really good partner to Mew EX. If you're running Tauros and Mew EX together in a deck, you basically have 2 Pokemon that can take down really anything in the game. It depends on of course, what the matchup is, but they work really well together synergistically. But unfortunately, I don't think Tauros ended up being like a super, super high tier card. In fact, it's actually not very prominent in the meta right now. It's not even really considered sort of a top 5 meta deck that are playing Tauros. Bullfrog is good, which is kind of why I want to put it in the A tier. So I think I'm actually going to put it in the A tier because I think even though right now the metagame shifted towards things like Gyarados and Mewtwo EX and Executor, that still doesn't mean that Tauros is good. It really is sort of that that basic EX Pokemon Stomper. That's really the purpose of it. It counters things like Pikachu, like Celebi, like Mew EX. So I think that Tauros will have a significant place in the metagame moving forward, especially if we find a way to accelerate energies to it. I think it's a really consistent, strong card, and I think it's very comparable to Marshadow, which is why we're going to put it in the A tier for now. Even though maybe it's not as significant in the meta as the other A tier cards, I think that it is as strong as those other cards. We have the new Continuous Step Eevee. This is funny. This is a card I would put in the C tier because it's sort of an upgraded version of the other Eevee in the sense that, yes, we can literally KO any Pokemon in the game on our first turn for 1 colorless energy on a basic Pokemon. So that's why I'm actually going to put it in the B tier. I would put it in the C tier. Most decks, in fact, aren't even running this Eevee, but just the potential that it can do what it can do. Again, it's a really RNG high roller card. I'm going to put it in the C tier, okay? I'll put it in the C tier. It just makes more sense. I don't think it belongs in the B tier, but I think it is quite good, and I think that it does actually enable Vaporeon and Flareon decks a little bit more than those decks necessarily would have if Eevee didn't exist or if it wasn't a card. So Chatot is interesting. I kind of want to put Chatot in the B tier. In fact, I'm going to because the attack is fairly strong. Now, we kind of put Siglith in the C tier for the similar reason, I guess, or maybe we put this in the C tier. I don't know. I feel like Chatot has a lot more potential as time goes on because it's a colorless Pokemon. Basically, the attack is quite strong. It allows you to kind of draw cards in your deck and move through your deck quickly, which can be really valuable even if you're only using this for one turn. So we've seen kind of that fossil strategy in like different decks with Gyarados, where you play all the different fossils and you kind of, you thin your hand out, you play them all, and then you discard them, and then you play Chatot, or you use Chatot's attack to draw 3 new cards. So it's a way to just kind of move through your deck quickly. But either way, I think Chatot could see some play. I'm going to put it in B. I think that it is kind of fringe meta, even though it hasn't really found a significant place in the current meta. I think that it is inherently a pretty strong card. I think that the attack is actually quite good on it. We're not going to rank Old Amber. It's the same thing as it was before. Pokemon Flute. So we're going to get into the supporters. Pokemon Flute isn't a bad card in my opinion. I'm going to put it in the B tier. Yes, it kind of enables things like Pidgeot and like Beheeyem, but that's not why I'm putting it in the same tier as them. I think that it's just inherently a pretty good card. I think that being able to force your opponent to put Pokemon on their bench can be really good. Yes, it's used right now to enable Pokemon that do more damage based off how many Pokemon are on your opponent's bench, but overall, I think that it's actually a strong card because it's an item card. Now, there's limited cards in your deck in Pokemon Pocket, so a lot of decks probably wouldn't choose to play Pokemon Flute, but I think that it does enable certain strategies, and I think that it is a disruptive card, and there's not too many of them in Pokemon Pocket, so that's why I'm going to put it in the B tier. And then next up, we've got, of course, Mythical Slab, and this thing is going straight into the S tier. People still don't understand, maybe they do, maybe they don't, how powerful Mythical Slab is. In my opinion, I think it's like the strongest card to come out of Mythical Island, or one of them. I think that it's going to make every Psychic type deck of all time for the foreseeable future potentially really strong. The reason why it's so strong is because it allows you to move through your deck quicker, more quickly than any other deck in the game. Yes, it only works for Psychic type Pokemon, but that's still crazy. So Psychic decks in the future are always going to have the upper hand unless other additional draw support cards get printed. For now, Mythical Slab is so good. We're basically, a massive shortage for draw support. Even though it's specific to Psychic type, this card is crazy. And basically it allows you to draw any Psychic type Pokemon if it's on the top of your deck. It's just good. It's just really good. Yes, yeah, if it's not a Psychic Pokemon, it goes to the bottom of your deck. But that's not bad either because, again, we're still moving through our deck. And yeah, Mythical Slab is just so good. Budding Expeditioner, this one is really interesting. I thought because Mew EX was going to be a little bit more prevalent in the meta as its own archetype, that Budding Expeditioner would be really relevant. In fact, I do think that the card is exceptionally strong, but I don't think that it'll ever necessarily be meta because I don't think that Mew EX is going to be really a frontline attacker or something that we really, have in the front line that often. It does go really well. Like, I'm kind of poised to put it in the A tier because I do think that it could be exceptionally strong in a future format. I think that its effect is really good. I think Koga is, it's the same thing as Koga, and Koga is extremely good too. So yeah, I don't know. We're going to just go ahead and we're going to put it in the B tier because it's seen like fringe meta play. It's not really meta defining at all. So I'm not going to put it in the A tier, although I do think inherently it's a really strong card. So either way, we're going to put it in the B tier for now, but it has A tier potential. I just don't think it really fits among the other cards here at the top of our tier list. Next up is Blue. Blue is interesting. I'm going to put it in the A tier, and the reason for this is because it's super specific. But in the matchups and in the scenarios where Blue is useful, it's very useful. It's similarly to how I would put Giovanni in the A tier in Pokemon Pocket in general. Blue, I would also put in the A tier because it's like the counter Giovanni card. There are scenarios where oftentimes your opponent is doing perfect lethal, and Blue is basically our way to avoid that. And there are a lot of different scenarios. The Mewtwo mirror match, for example, is one, and there's quite a few different scenarios in general, but I think that Blue is an A tier card. Now we're kind of limited for supporter space in Pokemon Pocket, but I still think that Blue is strong in certain scenarios, and I think it's a really important card. Maybe it could go B tier, but I think because it's specific yet so general in so many senses that it always provides value, we're gonna go ahead. We're gonna put it in the A tier. That might be kind of surprising for some people, but I actually think that it's maybe, does it go B tier? A or B tier? I can't decide. Do we really want to put, are we going to put it in the A tier? You know what? No, I've talked myself out of it yet again. I know I do this all the time. We're going to put it in the B tier. We're going to put it in the B tier because I think that it's sort of a niche play. Like, it sees play in meta decks, which is why I wanted to put it in the A tier. Mewtwo is probably the best deck in the game. It often does play Blue. But I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit too specific. Maybe I'm kind of ranking it above where it should be based on its fact that it's so valuable in that particular matchup and in those particular decks. But let's put it in the B tier for now. I don't think it's necessarily meta defining. However, Leaf is going in the S tier. Leaf is crazy. So one of the biggest commodities in Pokemon Pocket is your energy. It's the main resource in Pokemon Pocket. You only get one of them per turn unless you're playing in cards that let you draw additional energies. For that reason, Leaf allows you to conserve your energies. There's so many cards in the game right now that are really strong but have retreat costs of 2 or more. Things like Druddigon, things like not Aerodactyl, but I mean, I don't even know. There's just so many. Like I can't even describe to you how many Pokemon you can move out of the active spot with Leaf. It makes Weezing that much better. It just basically allows you to conserve energies, which is always really, really strong. Is similar to how X-Speed, I think, is an S tier card. I think that Leaf is also an S tier card. No, you can't play Leaf and Professor's Research on the same turn. That's literally the only downside to Leaf. But overall, I think that Leaf is so good. I think it's meta defining, and it's seen its way into almost every meta deck in the game right now. So I am going to put Leaf into the S tier. I think that Retreat is exceptionally good. And being able to give Pokemon with a retreat cost of 2 free retreat is so good. So yeah, that's the tier list, guys. That's what we're looking at. This is exactly how I feel, at least at the moment, given all these cards and what we've been able to play over the last few weeks. So I'm feeling good about this tier list. I want you guys to comment below. You know, what would you change about this tier list? I'm interested to see. Comment, you know, what your opinions are. I'll post the link to this tier list down in the description below. And you guys can go and make your own tier list and share it if you would like. Tag me on Twitter if you would like as well. But next up, let's go and take a look at the community average rankings for all of these cards and see what all of the other people that, you know, did this tier list and where they ranked all of these different cards. Let's see sort of how our tier list differs to their tier list. I'm really interested to see. All right, now let's take a look at the community average for this tier list here. This is what sort of all of the other people that made this tier list kind of settled upon for the cards, which some of this is very interesting. So again, I think probably most people did this tier list maybe when the set first came out. That's probably what I'm assuming. Maybe not as many people have been doing it recently, but some of the stuff is quite interesting indeed. So Jungle Totem and Celebi up in the S tier, along with Scolipede and Vaporeon and Pidgeot. So that's something I didn't necessarily agree with. I think as the meta has shapen up, we've seen that things like Scolipede, Pidgeot, Vaporeon are good cards, but not necessarily S tier cards indeed. And then in the A tier is where we see some of those fighting type cards like Aerodactyl and Golem. With Raichu being in the A tier is certainly surprising in my opinion. I don't think it's an A tier card really to any degree. Even this Rapidash or Golem, I think it's certainly kind of a stretch in my opinion. And then let's see if we go down. So Leaf, Mythical Slab, and Blue were actually in the B tier, which is something I certainly disagree with. Again, I think that Leaf and Mythical Slab are very meta-defining cards in their own degree. Is there anything else surprising here if we go down? Nothing else probably stands out. Okay, so we see Primeape here in the D tier, which is actually really funny. I know a lot of people didn't think Primeape would be like the best card, in my opinion. It seems underwhelming at first, but again, it just really fits really well in those fighting type archetypes. We see Salandit actually really high, Dedenne's high, this new Eevee, Ponyta. Galvantula ranked pretty high as well. I don't know necessarily think I agree. I don't think Galvantula's bad, but interesting to see sort of how the other people have ranked it. Lumineon, though, fighting its way into the C tier. A lot of these sort of, you know, additional cards here that, you know, do see play, but are kind of fringe, are certainly in the C tier. And then, you know, the D tier and the E tier, even the F tier, yeah. We kind of agree, like, some of these cards are just straight up, like, not very good for certain, right? People rank their cards very differently. They do their tier lists differently, as we saw with our tier list. We structured it a little bit differently, and the reasonings were different for sure. But I thought it would be interesting to just take a look at sort of how the community or the rest of the people that did the tier lists, you know, ranked these cards. But either way, yeah, definitely pretty funny. So, okay, so we're going to wrap up this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. It's been a long one. I do apologize, but our Tuesday tier list videos do go quite long, but some of you guys enjoy them, and I really do appreciate that. So if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more Pokemon Pocket videos. We're uploading almost every day here on the channel. We're getting geared up for the new expansion to come out at the end of January. I'm really excited for that. And we have some new, really interesting content planned to be uploaded on the channel. So again, if you're not subscribed, I would recommend it. And if you are subscribed, hit that notification bell so you stay tuned for all the future videos. But yeah, guys, definitely comment below. You know, what do you agree with? What do you disagree with? I would love to hear your opinions on our Mythical Island tier list. But anyway, I'm going to get out of here, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll catch you guys later. Bye.